Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
After a week off, we are back, refreshed and with a jam-packed show. Today, we are kicking off season 4 of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, and it is going to be a banger of an episode. This week, we are back with our first political roundtable in almost 4 months, and we are looking forward to some spicy, yet respectful, conversation about all things politics. From the left, we are joined by Julius Hernandez, and holding down things for the right, we have Preya Samsundar. With Julius and Preya, we are going to start by breaking down a recap of the 2025 elections, what we saw in the Twin Cities mayoral races, and the New York of it all. Then we will get into updates in the Minnesota gubernatorial race and what this week's elections mean for the state of the race heading into 2026. And we will end with some hard-hitting news on Krispy Kreme and fantasy football. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the show. We are super excited to be back with a political roundtable. We haven't had one in months, and there is a lot to get to. And our last few episodes have been great. We've had some really great interviews, but this is what I get amped for. So I'm really excited to have our two guests here, Preya Samsundar and Julius Hernandez, bring the heat and really kind of bring the spice to everything that we get to talk about today. Starting with, it was election week. Odd-year elections don't get as much recognition as our even-year elections, but there was a lot at stake, a lot going on this time, and so I'm really excited to get into it. So we are going to start with Minneapolis mayoral race. Should note, Julius, I know you were on Team Fry, so why don't we just have you kick us off here and how things went, what you were doing, and obviously congratulations.
Yeah, it feels nice to take out a win sometimes, right? You lose a lot and then you win one and you're like, "Oh, that was kind of nice." Listen, it was an interesting race from the beginning, right? Like there was a lot of attention on this one, and I think there was a lot of things that happened between the start and up until Tuesday that were no one could have probably predicted. But I think it's just a testament to the good stuff that Jacob Fry is doing as mayor. I mean, it's very hard to win a second term right after the murder of George Floyd and all the unrest that happened in this state. But it's even harder to win a third term anywhere. And to win a third term as resoundingly as he did, with as much support as he did, just goes to show like, hey, there's obviously a feeling that he is doing a good job. And I think one of the other things that shows people are interested in a direction that he's taking the city is we flipped 2 council seats, right? Jeremiah Ellison, who's my council member, chose not to run again, and we got a more, by the Minneapolis standards, moderate in that seat. And then we flipped Ward 7, which was Katie Cashman, and now we have Elizabeth Schaefer, who's a park board commissioner, considered definitely the more moderate candidate in that race. And I think it just goes to show where the city is headed, right? It's obviously very different than our neighbors across the river. But for all the things Republicans like to say about Minneapolis, we rejected democratic socialism. And I think that's a big win for not just ideological battles that we might have in our own party, but it's a big win for good policy and for sound leadership that decides, hey, like, we're not just going to go with what's popular. We're going to go with what's right and what works. So yeah, I'm excited about it. It was a good night. And last thing I'll say, I think I was the only person in the world that ever was like, Jacob Fry's going to win the entire way. You can ask anyone I work with. There was times where everyone was like, "Oh God, this might not look too hot," and I was like, "Nope, he's going to win, no doubt about it." That's the only claim to fame this election I can take, I think.
As you mentioned, coming out of the first round ballot, Fry had a 10-point lead over Omar Fateh. Fateh did have more second choice votes than Fry, but that first ballot really solidified it for Mayor Fry's third term election here. So in the end, it was just about a little over 50% to 44%. With record turnout, 147,000 votes, just about 2,400 more votes than in 2021. This was one, we'll obviously get into St. Paul. I gotta say, I thought it was going to go another way. I thought that it was very unique that we saw the three kind of main opponents, Jazz Hampton, Reverend Dwayne Davis, and Omar Fateh, kind of coalesce together as an alliance, as a slate, basically saying anybody but Fry. Preya, what was your take when you saw this kind of alliance come in? Did you think Fry was gonna be able to pull it out, and were you shocked at all by the results?
Not at all. I think you kind of look at St. Paul and you kind of see the direction that I think folks in general are heading towards. I don't think Jacob Fry won because he had good policy. I think Jacob Fry won because he was the more moderate of the two candidates. And Omar Fateh, frankly, was a terrible candidate with a lot of baggage. I think when you look at Minneapolis as a whole, Minneapolis has changed so much in the last 20 years. Like, and I have these conversations with, I'll give you a prime example. I have these conversations with my own family. My parents, my dad immigrated here 40 years ago. So he came to Minneapolis in 1980s. He lived over in the Nokomis, like Morris Park area near Boston Terrace on 28th Avenue, moved down a couple of blocks more towards the VA and the Army base, Air Force base on 62. I grew up there. That is my home. But you have seen the change from the time that I was 5 years old to when we got out of Dodge after the George Floyd riots, where you literally could smell the smoke, and like the gas station that I filled my car up at every day going to high school got burnt down. Like, the city has changed so much. And I think when forced to contend with a choice of socialist policies that are going to make everything worse versus a guy that, yeah, you hate his policies, but it really can't get much worse than this, you're going to go with the guy that you're going to go with the devil you know versus the Eric Adams of it all sitting over here with Omar Fateh. I think it's very telling. Julius mentions, the Katie Cashman seat that flipped. When you look at the folks that were endorsing her opponent, they're primarily talking about Katie Cashman being too soft on crime, refusing to keeping George Floyd Square closed. They're talking about crime. They're talking about economic policies. They're upset about those things. So they're not going to go with somebody who's going to make it worse. They're going to stick with the devil they know until they can find somebody better.
Just to push back a little bit on some of the claims, I mean, I think you can reasonably make the assessment that there's a lot of people in this city that did not want a socialist for mayor. That's for sure. But we had the highest turnout we've ever had in the city's history, and the mayor did well in that election. I think it's a testament to, like, if they were really unsatisfied with his policies, there was also two other candidates that could have won the race. They could have potentially made some riffs. I mean, Jazz Hampton's a perfect example of someone who is mayor-esque in his policy, but maybe isn't viewed as more divisive, but people weren't particularly interested in that. I think the other part of it too is this claim that Minneapolis is like getting any worse is not statistically true. We've built more housing. The mayor has put in policy that has effectively made the most affordable housing of any comparable city of its size since he's been in office. You see things like our rent is generally staying the same, if not going down. Public safety numbers, yes, are they better? Absolutely, they are better. We've had the least. I live in North Minneapolis. We've had the least amount of shootings we've ever had on record, and so that's a testament to the work that the mayor is doing. And people aren't just voting for him just because it's the lesser of the two evils. People are voting for him because they believe in the vision that he's brought into the city, and they've seen Minneapolis get better. Let's not. The other part to remember about this too, right, is like Minneapolis is not immune to what happened over the last couple of years. If you had asked me 5 years ago or 8 years ago if I'd moved to a city that would be making national news every other year because of something really big happening, I probably would have not done it. But seeing the leadership that we've had at the mayor's office, standing up to people that are in the council and making the right decision over and over, I think is a testament to his leadership and to his policy. Because again, when you compare us to other cities our size, do we struggle in some areas? Yeah, of course, every city does, right? We're going through a lot. But also, when you look at some of the other things like livability and affordability, Minneapolis leads the way in that. And I think the referendum on the mayor's race was not particularly, oh, well, Omar Fateh sucks because he's a socialist. It's like, who is going to bring the better ideas and who's been doing the work to show that those ideas actually work. But that's not to diminish the fact that Omar Fateh is a horrible candidate. He's corrupt. He's a crook. And that's all I'll say about it.
I'm just going to push back here real quick because, as we all know, statistics are great and all, but it's all about perception at the end of the day. That's how elections are won. And the perception is that Minneapolis has gotten worse over the last 20 years. You can say that crime numbers have gotten better, but the reality is that there have been 54 homicides in Minneapolis. And statistically speaking, yes, have murders and homicides have gotten better? Absolutely. But when you compare them to pre-pandemic numbers, absolutely not. It has not gotten better. It is still historically high compared to pre-pandemic numbers. You want to hear an example? You want to talk about affordability? That's great. But I was driving down 34th Avenue just this past week because I still have family that lives in South Minneapolis. And there was this small bookstore that I grew up. My mom and I would walk down there every day when we still lived in the apartment that we lived in. I would ride my tricycle next to her and she would walk there and go to Book Trader. And it was an old lady who had had it for like 50 years. Super, like, just an eccentric little bookstore. They tore down that bookstore after she died. They built a pack and stack housing that just looks so not in line with what that neighborhood used to be, and they named it the Book Trader in honor of her. And I look down that neighborhood now, and I don't recognize it. I don't recognize the neighborhood that I grew up in, and I think a lot of people don't feel the same way. The reality is we can talk about rent and housing and affordability, and that's great, but there are still a lot of people my age, younger, that are still looking for that American dream that we all grew up on, that my parents fought very hard to come here to find. And that part of that is home ownership, and that's not a possibility right now, especially when we're knocking down houses and putting like really ugly pack and stack housing on top of it instead. The reality is, over the last 20 years, Minneapolis is not as great as it was. You know, I was talking to a reporter yesterday. KSTP did an article a couple of months back, and they're talking about the ridiculousness of property taxes in Minneapolis. And the city was forced to admit that the reason property taxes are going up 15, 20, 25, 30, 40% in areas across Minneapolis is not necessarily because property prices are going down, because if any one of us are looking at our property tax bills, we see the price of our home, the value of it is going down, but we're still getting property taxes up 15, 20% every single year. And the reason is because crime is so bad. People have fled downtown Minneapolis. There are skyscrapers that were once bustling with businesses and companies, and they are now vacant. They are dormant. When you drive down street after street in downtown Minneapolis, there are for rent signs. There are vacancy signs all over the place. It is a ghost town down there, and that is because crime is out of control, and so they're not getting revenue in downtown Minneapolis from those properties anymore. And now folks in houses in South Minneapolis and North Minneapolis and everywhere else are suffering as a result. So we can sit here and talk about this all day long, but the reality is that Minneapolis is just not what it was 15 years ago.
Well, let's also be realistic that Republican perception is not Democratic, and actually
this is not
reality
Republican
in general,
perception.
it's
My
Republican
dad's a Democrat.
perception.
My dad's a Bernie Sanders Democrat.
Hold on. I just got to point out though, you can make a lot of the big claims that you're making about Minneapolis, and that's fine. That's fine. Your perception and reality is different than what the people of Minneapolis think. And I know it because I do it every day. I work organizing down here, and I get to talk to people that are excited about what's happening. There's this thing, I think everyone knows about it. It's called a pandemic. It happened that destroyed downtown. The reality is, though, is that downtown is modeled after a way of life that doesn't exist anymore. People don't just go work, hang out after. They do other stuff that doesn't revolve around downtown. And so do we have to pivot? Absolutely. Every city does. St. Paul's a perfect example of how if you do worse policy, it will get even worse. I'm sorry, but we didn't implement rent control, and St. Paul did, and look what's happening down there for them. They have this multi-decade plan that they're going to have to put in place to revitalize their own downtown. And right now, Minneapolis is doing better downtown than comparable cities anywhere across the country. So again, it's not like this. This is the problem I have with Republicans right now, right? It's like you guys are all trying to make this Minneapolis seem like it's this hellhole and that it's an unlivable, like, dystopian place. But we're the economic driver of this state. And if you didn't have our money, this state wouldn't survive without it. And by the way, we put in more money into the state than we get back in our own tax dollars. And you guys seem really fine with that, funding all of your funding every other town in this state, but then seem to have a problem when you don't want to come here and, like, live in reality. Crime is down. By the way. You can say it's not pre-pandemic. Sure, no place in the world is down pre-pandemic. The way the world functions has changed. But we as a city have done better. And I'm really like sick of hearing this Republican talking point that like Minneapolis is this like unlivable dystopia, because it's not.
I'm gonna bring us back a little bit because I love where this is going. I have one comment on the state of Minneapolis, but I want to kind of keep
If it's
instead
about
of just
precarious state, I won't accept it. I won't. It's
oh,
not, no,
well,
I
you
won't
are
accept.
a mind reader. But I'm going to make my statement, but we're going to focus mainly about the election rather than we maybe have a whole nother episode about Minneapolis as a whole. But I do want to make a mention. We recently, Julius, I know you're an avid listener of The Breakdown. We just had Jim Rubin on and talked to him a lot about what the Minneapolis is looking like for somebody like himself who lives there, who has worked there. And, he's selling off a lot of properties. He's talked about crime and how crime statistics really aren't necessarily factual right now because police truly don't have the capacity to answer a lot of the crime that is going on. They have to focus solely on carjackings, murders, and really like the drug trade and different issues that are going on are simply not about it. I think we can agree to disagree about what the state of Minneapolis looks like, because I think that you certainly have some good points. I believe, some of the things that we did see in precarious state about how Minneapolis is worse off than Baltimore right now. And so there are some real issues there. But coming back to this mayoral election, Michael, I want to get your input here because with record turnout, with the thought that folks were trying to vote for the devil we know and not the devil we don't, and kind of the lesser of all evils here, do you think that we can attribute this to some Republicans stepping in, maybe 2,400 particularly, stepping in and casting votes, or maybe some folks that didn't turn out before really just showing up for the mayor because they saw what could happen under a Democrat socialist like Fateh?
First of all, let me say it's always nice to have a panel of undecided voters on the podcast. It's really nice having people who are just casual observers of what's going on in the world. But let me just say this. As a guy from the suburbs, here's my take. I think that we have covered, I think, a bit over the last few episodes, Becky. And I think to kind of piggyback on things that Julius said and certainly that Preya has said as too. First of all, Minneapolis is the largest city in the state. And so there is, I think, and we've discussed this. We discussed this with Jim Rubin. We discussed this a little bit with Coachella and other people that we have on, that Minnesotans and Republicans should want Minneapolis to succeed. Because if Minneapolis succeeds, the rest of the state succeeds. I think it's fair to say, based on the interviews that we have, that Minneapolis is maybe in a precarious state. The state is. But I will say to you is that the election, I think, worked out the way I think a lot of people were hoping that it would. I think that there was a concern. Elections are about contrast. And I think the policies of the DSA, I think the DSA, their slate of, I think, 4 candidates won on the city council. But what they really wanted is they wanted the mayoralship. They wanted the mayor's office. They didn't get that. And so kudos to Frye's campaign and the organization, because as we covered throughout the last few months, Becky, I think there was an organized apparatus really, really working hard to stick it to him and to his campaign with the DFL endorsement and the things that occurred and then getting revoked. I think that they put up with a lot in navigating that mess and coming out on top is no understatement. So my compliments to Julius and others who shepherded and led that effort, because Frye is now there for another 4 years. I think that me being glass half full and always wanted to be positive, I think that's good for the direction of where Minneapolis can go, because I heard a lot when we covered it about how things need to improve. I think that Minneapolis can improve and get back to where some of the points where Preya has talked about, where it used to be, we can get some buildings filled downtown, businesses filled downtown. I think that's more likely to happen under a Mayor Frye and with a more sensible city council than it will be with a candidate who's backed by the DSA, a candidate who went out there and campaigned on saying that, who has talked about over the years that capitalists and capitalism is the true enemy of the DSA. You cannot grow a city. You cannot get economic development, which benefits the entire state, with a candidate like that. And so as a guy from the suburbs, I'm glad that Fry won. I'm glad that there is going to be some changes in the dynamics of the city council. Hopefully, it will make the city function better and get the improvements that Jim Rubin talked about and other people we've had on this show talk about.
Great analysis there. I want to move this over the river to St. Paul, which had a quite a bit different output or outcome, and one I was wrong about again. In this one, of course you do. Here in St. Paul, Representative Kali Hur defeated incumbent Mayor Melvin Carter. She secured just under 52% to Carter's 48.5%. And this was complete opposite in many ways. In the first round, Hur was down by just about 2.5% and made up those votes in the second round of ranked choice voting. She is the first woman, first Hmong American, and first Asian American mayor of St. Paul. Big things there. I will also have to give a shout out to my colleague here, Patrick Connolly. He was an advocate for Kali Hur. I know. He was on the show before. He talked about the carjacking that him and his family or his wife endured a couple of years ago. And Rep. Hur was a huge supporter and advocate for them, really held their hands throughout that process and the tragedy that their family endured. And so he really was a big advocate for her, and he's been singing for the last week that she was going to come out on top. And I gotta tell you, I really didn't see it happening, and it did, and it's huge. So Julius, I want to get your input on starting here with what happened in St. Paul. And did you think that this was going to happen? Anything in your mayoral campaign world that you were expecting?
Oh yeah, I mean, I thought she was going to win the moment she jumped in the race. This was the one. This was the one that was most confusing.
Bullshit.
No. Oh no, I have text messages from August.
Okay.
Oh, I have.
Okay.
I'm going to give them to you, and you're going to put them in this right here so that people can see my text messages. I got receipts. Here's the thing. And maybe me and Preya will agree on this part. I always thought that Melvin Carter not getting a serious challenge at the beginning of his race was dumb. St. Paul, I'm sorry to say it, is like unbearable to be in. It is literally a ghost.
Wow.
It is awful. I do not like being in St. Paul to just hang out. Now I live in Minneapolis, and that's my normal stance day to day. But now more than ever, I always looked at St. Paul and thought, there's no way this guy's just going to glide to re-election after all the issues they had. I'm sorry. When you implement rent control and it did what it did to St. Paul's housing market and economy, and someone doesn't step up against you to run because, I'm sorry, it's like not a great city right now in terms of where it is financially and economically and around housing and other things. I just thought it was absurd. And then when Rep. Hur jumped in, I thought it could be close. I think low turnout will help her. She represented a part of the city that has the highest turnout. And the moment that I saw those first round numbers, I knew she was going to come back, because there's no appetite for someone who sides with these bad policies and does what they do to the city. And by the way, I just want to give him credit really quick, because he was incredibly gracious in his loss, and was incredibly he was incredibly gracious, and he set a perfect example of how when you lose, it's not personal, it's just politics, and that's what it is. Sometimes you do things that make people not want you to be elected again. And he could have said, he could have gone out there and said, I'm the greatest mayor the city's ever had, and he could have gone on this whole thing, but he was gracious in defeat, and you can tell he wants her to be successful because he loves his city. That doesn't change the fact that the things he's done for his city have not been great. But, I was always so shocked that he never got serious competition up until the end there. And I drove through St. Paul for a reason that I won't disclose. But the amount of Representative Hur signs that I saw.
What are you running, rum?
Yeah. Prohibition era stuff going on.
Are you bringing marbles to the city?
Listen, that's not the point we want to focus on. But the point I want to focus on is the amount of signs I saw of hers in areas that were high turnout. I remember thinking, I thought at the beginning that he would lose if someone serious came in, and then it confirmed my belief that he was going to lose, because again, that city needs a lot of help, and all you needed was someone serious to say, what are we doing here? What are we doing? And I like Melvin Carter as a person. I think he's incredibly nice, but nice doesn't fix cities, and I think Representative Hur will do a good job of turning back the track and saying, okay, how can we fix this? And how can we put in policy that's going to make a difference? Because St. Paul is it should be considered a very beautiful city, and it should function as such. And they deserve someone who's going to not just cave to pressure, but do the right things.
You mentioned Mayor Carter's response after the victory of Rep. Her. He had actually retweeted himself. He had tweeted in 2023, he said, heard someone say St. Paul should elect a woman as mayor, and they might have been trying to insult me, but that actually sounds cool. He retweeted that and says, it still sounds nice. Good luck, Rep. Her. And it was really a heartwarming kind of thing of congratulating her, applauding that it was the first mayoral woman. I don't know if things have changed since the article I read, but across, in Minneapolis, while Jazz Hampton and the Reverend had called Mayor Fry, as of end of the day Wednesday, Senator Omar Fateh had not reached out and congratulated him. And it's just like, come on, man, like, get over it. Michael, I feel like you have something to say on the
I just want to say I think Mayor Carter handled it with complete class, and I don't know, as you noted, I don't know if Senator Fatah has congratulated Mayor Fry. I think the takeaway is a lesson for you, Becky. You've been a very poor loser over the years, and so my hope is that the example that Mayor Carter set yesterday in his commentary will give you some quiet introspection as we move forward doing this podcast.
Thank you. Preya, I want your insight. I think one thing that surprised me from my experience in working in comms and with campaigns is we often see the negativity, right? We see the attacks, we see the mudslinging, which I hate and love all at the same time. It's effective.
I'll check my texts.
But that's one thing that Rep. Her surprisingly did not lean into. She kind of leaned more into being a competent individual, wanting to meet with the community, wanting to be there, be present, and really get away from what she could have leaned into, about negativity surrounding Mayor Carter and what he has done to the city in his first terms here. What's your thought on how she campaigned, and were you surprised by the outcome?
I kind of agree with Julius in the sense that
Come on,
Mayor Carter should have had a serious challenger from the get-go. I mean, the fact that, I thought he needed a serious challenge the moment he thought that beautifying the public parks would lower crime. That was when I was like, nah, this guy needs to go. So 100% agree with a lot of the things that Julia said. I think in terms of the messaging, it is very interesting just because, we have gotten into a space where when in communications, we rely heavily on emotions. And so what emotions drive people to the polls? It's usually fear, it's sadness, it's desperation. It's really playing up what people hate about what's going on in their city and providing a stark contrast that gives people hope. In a lot of cases, that works. In some cases, being the happy warrior does very well. You kind of see that with Tim Scott in South Carolina. He doesn't do a lot of mudslinging, and it works for him. And it has lifted him up to be now NRSC chair. I think when you look at that happy warrior figure, which, we can say Rep. Her carried a little bit more, you have to look at it from a place of authenticity, right? If you're slinging mud and it's not who you are, people can smell the fake. They can smell the politicking right off the bat. And that actually does more damage than just being authentically who you are. And so I think for Rep. Her, I don't know her very well. I haven't had a chance to interact with her, but I'm guessing is that they probably did test how going on the attack and providing that more stark contrast against Carter would play. And what they came to realize very quickly is that it just wasn't authentic. It wasn't who she was. And that they needed to pivot their message to be more about, hey, everyone knows how sucky St. Paul is right now. Everyone knows how rent control has done damage to the economy. They see the near 10% sales tax going on in St. Paul right now. They see all of the bad. So if she's just focusing on that problem solver mindset and that problem solver's campaign, is it one, authentic, and is it authentic in a way that is going to grasp people's attention? And what ended up happening. It worked for her. She was authentic to who she was, and by providing that problem solving mentality, she's able to address the issues without being negative or going on the attack. And it did create a campaign and an opportunity for her to rise to victory, especially when sentiment against Carter was already going down fast.
Michael, I want your input here. We saw, as these two mentioned, she got in late. She didn't get in until August, just had a very short runway to victory here. And she's actually somebody who previously worked in Mayor Carter's office. She was policy director, but left when she thought that the mayor was surrounding himself with too many yes men and women. She obviously has good name ID representing this area in the state legislature. But in your experience, was it a shock for you like it was for me? And do you remember ever seeing somebody come out victorious with such a short campaign here against an incumbent candidate?
I'm going to piggyback on what Julius and Preya said, although I'd like them to disagree more because it's more fun. It was, yes, that they both, their analysis was, and I think yours too, but Becky, was surprised that he wasn't challenged sooner. I would add that the probably most cutting statements we've ever had in this podcast were just issued by Julius about the city of St. Paul. I just need to remind him that we are recording, Julius, and this is a podcast that's going to be streamed. And I do want to figure out what you're doing in St. Paul at some point. But I was surprised, and piggybacking on what everyone else has said, she got in late, but it does show, to both Preya and Julius's point, and I think to yours, Becky, too, that there was some vulnerability there. I think she ran a very positive race. I wasn't surprised. I knew it was I was more surprised that she got in late, but I think we're all kind of on the point that there was a clear opportunity there prior to the results coming in yesterday. I just want to share a funny story. I'm dyslexic, and so I always have to work on grammar and listening and writing. And I've been talking to people about this race, and they would say, "Her said," and I said, "Who said?" And I'm like, "Wait," I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I got tripped up in a number of conversations. I said, "Okay, we're going to call her, she's a state representative, just call her Rep Her, and then I'm not going to get as confused." But Mayor-elect Her, the one thing I will say is one thing I wanted to share about some of the visuals of yesterday or election day, a lot of smiling faces. And I've seen her face smiling all over TV. And I also saw Mayor Fry smiling. I like to see that. And I think we're at a time in politics where seeing politicians smiling and being excited, even though Mayor Fry has been elected, this is what, third term he won re-election. I got the sense that on election night, he was excited to tackle the city and maybe and address some of those problems. And I think Rep Her, now Mayor-elect Her, has, I think, a really just infectious personality. And I think a lot of people saw that and that worked. And I also just want to say one more time to Mayor Carter, who, I've never met, but boy, I was really impressed by what he said. And I think that my hope is that we reward that type of stuff, that we don't reward the cynic and the one who pounds their fist. I think it's fair to say that on the Republican side, we've had some problems with people accepting the results of the election and sowing discontent. And to see Mayor Carter come out and act that way, I thought was responsible. But I think Minneapolis and St. Paul are in good hands, and my hope is that there's some changes that occur so that people like Jim Rubin and others and all the stories that we've all talked about interacting in those cities, things start to improve a little bit, because when Minneapolis and St. Paul succeed, we all succeed.
Great work, all. I want to keep us moving because we have a lot I want to get insight on. Just going to gloss over real quick. There were two special elections for the Minnesota Senate. Both went exactly as we expected. Republican won the seat vacated due to the death of Republican Bruce Anderson, won by 25%. Very similar margins in District 47, Woodbury area. This was the seat vacated by the resignation of Nicole Mitchell after she was found guilty of multiple felonies and finally decided it was time to resign. So the makeup of the Senate remains the same. We are going to have two more upcoming special elections. Currently, the Minnesota House is going to be a little off kilter here. Rep Her obviously is vacating her seat due to her win in the St. Paul mayoral race. And the representative Amanda Hemmingson Yeager won that District 47 Woodbury seat, so she's moving over to the Senate. So we are down to Democrat representatives. We'll have two more special elections, marking us 8 special elections from January 2024 to January 2025. Michael.
You see that sentence you said, her once or her seat.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
I
See
know.
that
I get it. I
the
get it.
dyslexia and I get confused. I'm like, this turns into a who's on first thing.
You are right. It is confusing, but I think we all got through it. So thank
Just
you for fighting through.
just refer to her by her proper title, as I always say.
Yes.
They have election
Perfect.
certificates, damn it.
Yes. Moving on to another mayoral race, this time in New York, just because I think there are, we're going to chat about implications about all of this here in a little bit, but just a notable thing to discuss. Zohran Mamdani won the New York City mayoral race, defeating former Governor Andrew Cuomo. He was running as an independent. Mamdani got just over 50% at 50.4. Cuomo got 41%, and the Republican got 7.1%. He is now going to be the first Muslim American mayor of New York City, the first South Asian mayor, and the youngest mayor in over a century for the city. Very similarly, and we'll talk about messaging a little bit more later, but the race, similar to Minneapolis and St. Paul, focused a lot on the cost of living and housing affordability, taxes on the wealthy, and your typical socialist leaning candidate messaging. So this is going to be a big thing that I think will be coming up for the foreseeable future. Preya, I'm going to start with you. Let's have it.
Honestly, I'm not really surprised. I mean, when you're talking about a slate of bad candidates, right? Like the New York City.
She just goes right into it. Just not even. There's just right there. I'm sorry. I'll shut up. You just went right into it. Love it.
Tell me, imagine a worse slate of possible candidates that you could possibly have on a ticket for New York City mayor. A guy who's now mayor-elect who took a photo with the unindicted co-conspirator for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, Governor Grabby Hands, and then Mayor, what do you call Eric Adams even? The briber in chief over there, hanging out with the folks in Turkey? What do you expect the people of New York to choose? Because as much as I love Republicans and would love to see more Republican mayors out there, especially in big cities, because I do think that we have the tools, the resources, and the ideas to turn these cities around, the reality is Curtis Siwa, or however you say his last name, was just not a viable candidate, and even Donald Trump thought so. So, I mean, really, when we're looking at a slate of candidates who actually had the ability to contend, I'm really not shocked that this played out the way that it did. Democrats, if they wanted to seriously take on someone who is very anti-Semitic, and it goes past anti-Semitism, it almost borderlines pro-terrorist on some of the things that he said and done, they needed to put up a better candidate, and they did not. They gave us a governor who literally had to resign in disgrace for sexual harassment and Me Too stuff, and then the current mayor literally was bribing his way into 5-star hotels and trips all over the world. I mean, it's almost Chicago-esque, 1970s, 1980s, where Democrats were tied in with all of the wrong people, just running amok, and you still have got people getting indicted 30 years later. It's not a great system. We can't really expect better from the city. So I mean, it played out exactly the way that it was supposed to, I guess.
Julius, I'm going to shoot it over to you. I saw some faces being made there. Let's just start with the general. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I did make a couple faces. The pro-terrorist thing about Zohran, I mean, listen, you're not going to find anyone that is not a fan, particularly of his policy, more than myself, maybe on my side of the aisle. But I said on my side of the aisle, right? Let's just. Good. But nonetheless, I think the pro-terrorist thing is a little intense even for him. I don't know that he's a particularly great.
He couldn't condemn Hamas.
I think he condemned Hamas. I feel very confident in that. If you mean globalize the intifada, that's a different story. But nonetheless, I think Preya's right. I mean, Governor Grabby Hands, that's a great name, by the way. I'm going to start. I will be pocketing that and using it for later. That's awesome. We have President Grabby Hands, too, so just to be clear about that. And one got caught saying it. But that's neither here nor there. The reality is what frustrates me about the Democratic Party right now, and the Republicans have a lot of issues, but what frustrates me about my party is sometimes we substitute bad candidates that have good policy, in this case would be generally Andrew Cuomo. If you want to talk about COVID, for sure, we can have a discussion about that. Generally good policy for people who are good candidates with no experience in really bad policies. So for Zohran, it's like, listen, if you're a political commentator or a person who works in the space in any capacity and you think Zohran's not a great candidate, who is a great messenger and is charismatic and easy to listen to, you've lost your mind. He is a great candidate. He is someone that can go out there and win people over. I mean, I saw him going to these clubs in New York City, and he just looked like he's someone that you would be like, okay, I could hang out with you there, and I would want to do that. But then you put people like him in who just have bad policy. And Graham Plattner, Nazi from Maine, same exact thing, where it's like, he just has a deep voice, and like people are into that now because they want to like substitute bad policy for like looking really macho and being like an oyster farmer, but he's not even really an oyster farmer. He just owns a oyster farming business. So it's like, I somewhat agree with her in that sense. I will say this though. I've actually been incredibly surprised on the Democratic side how many people that I would consider like very normal, moderate Democrats that are actually not as like alarmist about him, because he does have some good housing policy, maybe not the rent freeze if you're thinking about it from that perspective. But Preya makes a good point, right? Like you have Curtis Lewa who has 17 cats. I have a cat. I don't hate cat people, but that's just weird. And
he has 17 cats?
Yeah, he has 17 cats, dude. And they're like all strays and they look crazy. But but then you also have Cuomo who, yeah, like Governor Grabby Hands who can't keep his paws in his mitts to himself. And was just like, he's not a good campaigner anymore. He's lost his mojo, right? Like 2010, 2012, Cuomo would have probably been a good candidate. Now it's just like, he's very, very controlled environment. He's not fun to listen to. And like, he's not like charismatic. It's like the guy has got no juice. So I think from that perspective, that race was always going to be Zohran. And for the sake of New York and for the sake of the American economy, let's hope that a lot of... Oh, by the way, this last thing I'll end on, because I know I went on a little rant there. Most of the people in New York who voted, who said his policies weren't feasible, voted for Zohran. It didn't make any sense to me. Voters always confuse me so much. There was an exit poll that was done that said like a majority of New Yorkers don't actually think Zohran can do any of his policies, and they all voted for him, which was like the craziest thing I've ever seen. Where it's like, oh, you don't actually believe this guy's policies? It just goes to show how candidate quality really affects like how you can win or lose elections. So
I'm going to call it here. The number one thing we all agree on is Governor Grabby Hands. So great job, Preya. Michael, to you, and then we're going to quickly move into our next topic.
A couple quick comments. First of all, based on what Julius just said, it reminds me again of one of my favorite quotes about democracy. Ken Brockman, I've said it before and I'll say it again, democracy simply doesn't work. Number one. Number two, I want to understand at some point offline the difference between mojo and juice. Julius or Juanism can fill me in on the difference between those two. The other thing I just want to very quickly say, and this is a broader subject, we can talk about a later point in another episode, but Democrats won a lot on election day with candidates from a whole variety of aspects of the political tent. I want to put a pin in that, but I want Republicans to note that from the mayor of New York to the governor of Virginia to other elections, the Democrats won with a pretty broad tent. And that's something that Republicans should look at. With that, we can move on.
All right. Last thing I will say is Democrats also won with a candidate who wished death on their opponent's children. And we all, I think, can universally condemn that. We are seeking in this show and all of our shows to show that we can disagree. We can be on different sides of the aisle, but we don't need to go that far. And that's really gross. And we're going to move on because we simply don't have time to continue on with our election coverage here. We're going to move into 2026 election coverage. We here in the great state of Minnesota have a governor's race. We all know that Tim Walz is running for his third term. We have a variety of Republicans in the race, and this week, one more joined the crew. We have Speaker Lisa Demuth, who entered the race for governor. And so I do want to swing into this conversation, and then we're going to come back and chat about kind of the overall narrative and takeaways from the 2025 elections that we expect to be at play as we head into 2026. So starting off with her launch, she is expected to be remaining speaker while she is running for governor. In her launch video, she said, "I'll never bow to the radical mob, and I'll never apologize for standing up for common sense. Let's fire Tim Walz and take our state back." She has touted being the highest ranking Republican in state government, said that she has solid conservative values that really do cross party lines. They are conservative values that are supported by many Minnesotans. And like many of the other candidates right now, she said it is her intent to abide by the GOP endorsement, but has left open the door to running in a primary, as I believe so far most of the candidates, if not all, have done so. Let's go, Preya. Initial thoughts. Were you expecting her to get in? I know there were kind of rumblings along the way, but what's your thought of her joining the field with Jensen, Qualls, Robbins, and others?
I don't think it really was a surprise. I think a lot of people have been trying to get her into this race for months now. She's got a good background. She's got a lot that she can tout. It's really not a surprise that she's getting in. I think that we have an abundance of riches when it comes to all of the candidates that we have in the race so far. Based on the rumor mill, it sounds like there are a couple of others that are thinking about getting into the race or seem to be hinting that they're getting into the race. So it doesn't seem like the field is quite done filling out. It will be very interesting to see a couple of different things. One, how are different messages going to solidify folks in their various lanes? Two, how do delegates differ this time around compared to 2022 and 2024? Because the delegate bases during those last 2 years were vastly different and wanted very vastly different things. And then just to see how bloody it gets, because you're kind of seeing some blood being drawn already just from Demuth getting in, but just seeing how bloody it gets and how wounded we come out of endorsement. I do think this is going to go to a primary, to be quite honest. So, how wounded do folks come out of a primary to take on Walz?
As we head into next year, I do think you just gave me a great idea for part of a show. We need to talk about that delegate base and what that's going to look like. Is the turnout going to be different for folks who show up to caucus to be part of that or not? And so let's put a pin in that, because I think it's a huge conversation that needs to be had. And Michael, I want your insight, because I was personally, we saw as she got in, obviously other candidates like to put out their statements as well. Was not sure how, as Preya said, how bloody, how targeted attacks were going to be this, a year out here. Robbins came out swinging, and I thought her comment was stronger than I expected it to be, and definitely pointed, trying to again define those lines here. Kristen Robbins, in the race representative as well, said Lisa Demuth agreed to the backroom budget deal that raised taxes and shut down the Stillwater prison with no plan. She goes on to say that Demuth and Walz raised our taxes and made our streets less safe, and that's exactly what I'm fighting against. Were you surprised that she came out that quickly, or do you think it's incumbent on her to be able to start to show differences first if they're both going to have some sort of a different line and not pull from the same base?
Yeah, I'll be trying to be as quick as I can with my answer. A couple of things. Republicans like to talk about Reagan's 11th commandment. I want to remind our listeners, and particularly Republicans, that Reagan never agreed to Reagan's 11th commandment, which is thou shalt not speak ill of another Republican. Just ask Jerry Ford in 1976. And so, and George W. Bush and John Anderson and others. Reagan engaged in a lot of hard contrast with his opponents. And so I think that hard contrast is good, and it's the type of race that should happen. I don't have a process concern with what Robbins said. I have a little bit of a messaging concern, because the vote that she's referring to lumped in a number of her legislative colleagues. And so when you're going to take a swipe and you're going to characterize one vote in a particular way, everyone else that voted that way fits into that group. And so I thought the response was, I understand the logic. I understand the point she's trying to make. I thought it was not, I think it's important to throw kind of some messaging opportunities. I think there could have been a better execution of the message, maybe a little bit more maybe more specific, maybe less kind of blunt, because I think there's been, at least in my conversations, there's been a bit of reverberation and there's been some scuttlebutt about the tone of Robbins' message. That being said, Republicans this is going to be a contentious process. My hope is that every candidate agrees in some way to run in the primary, because these campaigns need to run differently. There is literally no benefit to abiding by an endorsement, because there's always going to be a legal primary. And what happens is, if we have this intramural contest as some type of measuring point, it's like winning a preseason game when you're in the NFL. It literally doesn't matter. But Republicans over the last few years have put way too much emphasis on the endorsement process. All campaigns should run in the primary. And I don't think the field is set. I think other candidates are going to get in. But I took note of this. I took note that Speaker Demuth got in. She was hit by Walz, the DFL, and by a Republican candidate in press statements. To me, that makes her, at least in this very short race, I think it puts her in the front runner place, but it's way too early, as I noted, to crown anyone as being in the driver's seat right now. But the fact she was attacked by all sides at least makes me think that people are concerned about her gaining some traction.
I have to agree. I think that for me, I think that we can look and put some of the candidates already in different buckets, in different lanes that are different. I think that because we know that how it goes in politics, just the fact that they are both women is going to lump them together in a lot of ways and in a lot of people's minds.
You're right, and I wish that wasn't the case. I just wanted to say that, but go ahead.
Yep, nope. I think that you and I would say Julius probably hopes that wasn't the case as well. I think you guys are on our team here. But with that, I just have to say, I think that this message, from my initial viewing of it and how I still feel today, was a goal or an attempt by Robbins to message to that delegate base that can be won over by saying this candidate voted to raise taxes. There are a few things that delegates are going to look at, and that is going to be a message that being too cozy with Governor Walz voting to raise her taxes are some easy wins to get some delegates over to your side. I think you're right, Michael. I think that there is always problems when you do a broad statement like that lumps in some folks. I don't know that the delegates will get that intel, that will get that info, that there's some of their favorite representatives voted the same way. So you mentioned Democrats hitting. I have a quote here from the Alliance for a Better Minnesota. They said Lisa Demuth would bring Trump's dangerous agenda to Minnesota. She would take away our reproductive freedoms, underfund our public schools, and give tax break to billionaires and build corporations at the expense of Minnesota families. Julius, I saw you kind of shaking your head at some of the things we were saying, praising Speaker Demuth here. What's your thought on the alliances and Walz's statements against her, and your thought of her getting in the race in general?
Yeah, I think when you start your gubernatorial race with, a press conference where you say multiple times, "I love Donald Trump's endorsement," in a state, by the way, where he's lost multiple times and he's not a popular figure, and you have to win some of these independents and soft Democrats to win this state, you're really just goes to show the quality of candidates that the Republicans put up and how they don't understand how to win this state. Now, let me say this. What I think will be fascinating about this race is how much red on red crime will happen, which I'm always a fan of. And I am incredibly excited to see where the GOP base, activist base, goes with the convention, because these are the same people that put up Royce White and are the same people that put up litter boxes in bathrooms, Scott Jensen. And so I think when you look at this one, it'll be really fascinating how many candidates are in and who brings the most and what that looks like. What I am interested in is, Preya was mentioning that there's some rumor mills that there's some other people going to get in. I've also heard the same thing. And there's particularly one person I'm interested in seeing if they get in, because I actually think from a candidate perspective, they could toe the line of action for Liberty Republicans and maybe like normie ones. So I'll wait till they come out before I say anything about it. But
I'm not running, Julius.
Yeah.
You're referring to me, but I'm not running.
Yeah, I view you more as like a Royce White kind of Republican. So no, but I think, like, again, first of all, whoever goes up against Tim Walz, I'm excited to see him toss them for however many times he's beat Republicans in this state. Because I just don't think, again, if your launch videos like ICE is doing a great job and we need to deport all illegals and take away health care, you're really touching with the Minnesota voter there who actually overwhelmingly disagrees with all of that. And so this always comes down to, how are you going to run this race? Are you going to run this as like a Donald Trump Republican, or are you going to run this as like a normal Republican who is just running because they care about these core issues that like suburban voters, specifically suburban women, care about? And what I will say too is I'm really fascinated to see where the money flows, because obviously Speaker in name only Demuth, is probably the candidate that all these national organizations want to run, just because of the contrast of her being the speaker, a black woman, a Republican, a conservative. I think those things bode well for donors. And Governor Walz has a war chest, right? So you need someone that's going to rake in some serious money to even have a chance to be competitive. But like I said, I'm really excited for the red on red crime. I think it is going to get messy, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. I will finish with this. This is not governor's race related, but I do think there is one candidate that is announced so far on the Republican side for a statewide office that could break the Republican winning streak in this state of statewide offices.
I know who you're going to say.
Go ahead, take a guess. I'll let you know.
Your friend Elliot Engen.
I think Elliot Engen can win. Let me tell you why. Me and Elliot disagree fundamentally on a lot of policy. I like him as a human. I've always been a fan of his.
You like him as a human.
Despite
what a low standard.
Despite who he is,
human.
Despite the way he
you
conducts
want a
himself,
pat on the back for that?
Listen, despite the way he conducts himself as a representative sometimes, and some of the policy votes he's taken, I've always thought Elliot is a great campaigner. He's charismatic, and also when you talk about what's been going on in the state with some of the fraud, I think a lot of Minnesotans don't actually particularly know the details of the auditor's office, and that's why you've seen Ryan Wilson put up such a good fight. And so I think Elliot is one that could probably break the streak just simply because of the nature of the race itself and what he's trying to frame it as. And so that's where I'll leave that. But
Michael.
Here's one thing I wanted to say about some of Julius's comment, and I'm going to pose this as a question to Preya and to Becky. As folks know, I've never voted for Trump, but I take a different approach. I separate some of his personality from the policy. So when I watch Demuth's video, and I want to get your legitimate feedback if you guys think I'm right about this. What I think Julius is doing is he is associating those policies with Trump. And I believe from, the campaign that I did last year, helping out a lot with, Republicans for Harris and other types of stuff, but the lane that I kind of occupy, I believe that there is a lot of Minnesotans who may not vote Republican or may not identify with Trump, who agree with that law enforcement approach on a number of things. And so if you can separate it from Trump, I disagree with him because I watched the video. And my take is a lot of those things, if you polled, they would kind of be considered the silent majority of people who would agree with a lot of that stuff. Do you guys think I'm right, wrong, push back? Floor is yours.
Go ahead, Tom.
I think you're right. I think that there are a lot of people that disagree with Trump on a personal level, but not on a policy level.
Yep.
I think when you talk about sending folks in with the National Guard, right? There are people... I remember seeing an interview from somebody in Atlanta that a friend sent me. It was a black gentleman from a not great neighborhood, and he was like, "Please, Mr. President, send the National Guard here because it's going to keep our kids safe." That was essentially the gist of the conversation. There are a lot of people, whether they're independents or they're Republicans, who are supportive of the president shutting down the borders and sending folks back because they do see stories about criminal illegal immigrants who are in this country and doing things they're not supposed to do. There are a lot of folks who may not love Donald Trump as a person, but they like his policies. They liked his economic policies from the first term. They're very supportive of getting boys out of girls' sports. That's an 80-20 issue that a majority of Minnesotans agree upon. Excuse me. I also think Minnesota is just in a very different space this year in this cycle than it hasn't been in the last couple of years. Obviously, the big thing is fraud, waste, and abuse. The stories just keep coming on in. I don't see an end in sight. I think that is going to be a huge problem for a lot of Minnesotans, especially when we're talking about fiscal conservatism in the economy. I also think that we also have to remember that Tim Walz was the vice president on a presidential ticket in 2024. And there is a curse that goes along with that. Amy Klobuchar dealt with that in 2024 after running for president in 2020. Royce White, terrible candidate. But guess what? Amy lost more ground in 2024 than she had ever had prior to that. Even with Royce White as a terrible candidate with no money, no funding whatsoever. Michelle Bachmann dealt with the same thing after she ran for president in 2012. She ran for a congressional seat again. She also dealt with the margins tightening in. Tim Walz has a lot to lose this time around for a number of reasons. One, he had to shed the folksy Minnesota, buffalo plaid wearing, dad vibe that he's been carrying on for the last 20 years because he had to reach the leftness of Kamala Harris and the national, Democrat Party. And so he had to take positions and say and do things that did not jive with the personality and the authenticity that he had as a governor candidate in 2018 and as a congressional candidate before. Couple that with the curse of running for president and then having to run for your seat again. Walz isn't going to be in the most vulnerable position that he has ever been, and Republicans have the arsenal now that they did not have before. And so there is an opportunity for Republicans to win at a statewide level, and there is absolutely a way for Republicans to win while touting Trump policies without having to be Trump himself. And you see that in Wisconsin. You've seen that happen in Wisconsin. You've seen that happen in Michigan and other states. It is definitely doable here. It is just going to be a matter of act and campaign strategy in order to thread that needle. But it is definitely possible.
Go ahead, Becky. Sorry.
There's a couple things I want to say on, even going back to your statement too. Starting with Michael's, I do want to completely agree. I think that a lot of Minnesotans who fall in that range of the moderates or more centrist Republicans or independents that could not see themselves and did not cast a ballot for President Donald Trump, myself being one of them, can look at the policies of a Donald Trump versus a Governor Walz and seeing our Republican candidates for governor touting some of those Trump policies and say, yes, under you, I like you bringing in some of those policies. I think that we're going to see polling on a lot of these issues that Julius mentioned that he despised or didn't like seeing in Demuth's announcement that actually do poll really well here in Minnesota. And unfortunately, I think, while you bash the call for Trump's endorsement, we got to look at this factually. To be able to win a general, you have to win the primary. And to win the primary, a Republican's going to need Trump's endorsement or at least not have Trump against them. And I think that is, there's only going to be a few folks that are eligible for Trump's endorsement here. And I think it's going to play hard. Obviously, it's going to have a role in the endorsement by the MNGOP delegates. I don't know that we will see an endorsement by Trump before then. I kind of waver back and forth, but I would not be surprised that this race gets an endorsement by Donald Trump, and I think it's going to have a lot of weight. So if you want to get to that general, you have to get through the primary, and so it does not surprise me. I think it's a good angle that she needs to go for. It doesn't surprise me at all that she went there. And also to Michael's point, I'm very excited that these candidates are going to the primary. We've been needing to see it. I hope it has a long-lasting impact on the M&G endorsement process. I also think it has a good way of amplifying and exciting the base, the full general voter base, because they're going to have more buy-in rather than it just being a handpicked individual coming down from the endorsement. So I think that's really important and something that we're going to see. And I think that one thing that Demuth has to her benefit here is being able to tout and say, well, Governor Walz is against Donald Trump as well, but look at our state and the failures that we're seeing here. Preya, you mentioned fraud. We're not going to have time to get through this new fraud report, but a scathing new report came up about the issues within the governor's office himself, not just his administration. We're hopefully going to have time to chat about it more because wow, oh, wow. And in words of Democratic Senator Ann Rest, it's appalling. But I think that there's going to be a lot of other things at play here. And one thing I think that Republicans have going for them is the messaging from candidates like Kristen Robbins and Speaker Demuth. I think that we have some really good messengers who are going to hit walls on fraud, who are going to hit about the issues that are going on in the state, and that we're going to see them really try to capitalize about like you mentioned way earlier, Preya, the perception of Minnesota voters versus what Democrats are saying that is actual, what we're still feeling and seeing. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that kind of works. But before we close here, because I know we're coming so close on time, but we've got about 10 minutes left, I really want to get your insight. And I want to start with you, Julius, because you chatted a little bit about this when we kind of went over the New York mayoral outcome. One thing that you said just recently is the red on red crime that you're really excited to, not crime, the mudslinging within the Republican candidates here for governor. We know that the Democrats are also in a place here in Minnesota and nationally that they see more division and tension than we've seen a lot lately. And with the election of folks like Mamdani in New York and with the success of some of the candidates here in Minneapolis, we know that, or I would expect that the left flank of the Democratic Party is a little emboldened, and the right flank or the Republicans are going to capitalize on that. What is your thoughts about that, about the division within the DFL here in the state? Within this, we saw a lot of back and forth when it came to the endorsement of Fateh, and with the battles going on there, we know what's happening up at the Capitol as well. We know that the DFL, especially under a new chair, Ken Martin isn't here to make everybody feel nice and good and keep all of the train on the tracks. What does this mean, the division within the Democratic Party, aside from what the Republicans are going to do as we head into 2026?
Yeah, I'm going to take some of my time to respond to all the things that were said by you guys that I didn't get a response for. Okay,
Sure.
So I'm going to throw some in there. If Republicans in this state who are running statewide want to run on Donald Trump's endorsement, want to run on sending the National Guard into Minneapolis, by the way, it's 60% of a majority of Americans say that they are not in favor of sending in the National Guard. If they want to run on ICE, sending in masked agents to rip, first of all, children out of their homes in the middle of the night, put them in zip ties.
I don't think it's going to be bracketed that way, but that's fine.
No, sure. If you guys want to run on it, please. We've seen Republicans in the state do it all the time where they think they can pull enough greater Minnesota votes to win an election statewide. It's simply not going to happen. And that gets me to this point, which is, even with all of our infighting, every election across the country that has been a key test of what the midterms are going to look like, even with the infighting, we still whoop your ass everywhere. We've done it everywhere. And so even with the infighting in the DFL, which I don't think is going to be as big of an issue maybe as it is on a national scale, I don't think candidates here are going to be emboldened, like you're saying, like these leftist candidates. I don't really know where they would come from. I think the base of the DFL in Minneapolis is incredibly different and much smaller than the base of activists of the DFL across the state.
I hope not.
But I think when it comes to that infighting, I think we deal with our infighting a little bit better than
that's
the
true.
Republicans do.
I will say
I think
that
we deal with
you
it a lot
guys do
better.
100%.
But
Yes.
I got to say something here to push back, because I'm not saying I expect a leftist candidate to push against walls. I'm saying we have seen some of those socialists, we have seen disruption at events from the left flank trying to hold Walz's feet to the fire. We have seen activists and delegates and volunteers coming up and saying, you didn't do this, or you did this, or you're being too cozy. We know that there are folks, and I feel as though with some of these other races, they feel a little bit more that it's their right to do that. But to your point that you're making, you don't think that's going to have any fall off on his voter base or votes that he receives because of that?
Well, no, not really. And I'll say for two reasons. One, I think what the governor does, what the job of governor is to listen to constituents, right? And I think the governor has done a good job of dealing with some of the infighting. I think it's these people's right to say, hey, I didn't love that you did this and you did that, right? That's ultimately, at the end of the day, that's part of his base. But what I will say also is I don't think it'll have, if you're talking about Minneapolis leftists or the suburban leftists in this state, and you're putting Governor Tim Walz, who's been a good governor for us, at least we think, and then you put him up. We think Republicans might not. DFLers for the most part are happy with our governor.
Independents aren't happy with them either.
But, hey, listen, like I said, run on all these policies. I'd love to see how independents side with you guys, because suburban women don't seem particularly interested.
They did polling. A majority did not want to see him run for a third term.
Here's what I'll say. And by the way, none of the candidates you guys have up now outpolled Walz when it came time to decide if they wanted a Republican or a Democrat. By the way, the best polling candidate, KTSP did it. Go look it up. The best polling candidate was Scott Jensen, who barely cracks 8% of within Walz. So hold on. Let me finish. Let me finish this.
It's a name ID issue.
It is a name ID issue, and Scott Jensen doesn't still have that great of a name ID, by the way. Let me finish this point though. If you're going to put up Tim Walz for Minneapolis leftists and Lisa Demuth, or you're going to put up Tim Walz and Litterbox Jensen, there's no comparison. They absolutely will vote against you guys every time. Our infighting is better. Why? Because we understand the stakes of what's going on. We get Lisa Demuth, who wants to bring ICE into Minneapolis, or we get Tim Walz, who's going to defend us from the federal government. They're going to take Tim Walz every day of the week.
And he's going to squander another $2 billion to fraudsters all over the state.
Yeah.
While doing it.
I hear a lot of these talking points from Republicans, but you guys can't win. And so that's the point.
But here's the thing.
Even with all these issues, even with all, I don't want to debate the policy. What I want to debate is you guys cannot win elections.
Taxes all across the board, and we're going to give $2 billion of your money to fraudsters who are buying Lamborghinis and Mercedes-Benz and buying third and fourth homes in Kenya, and you think that's not going to be a problem because Republicans agree with Donald Trump on, like, sending in the National Guard? Are you kidding me? Because let me tell you right now.
Put your candidates up in a midterm election.
No. We're gonna do this.
Incredibly unpopular, and where you've been losing across the country in red districts, by the way, and you guys are going to get smoked.
Was unpopular.
Yes, absolutely.
Number one.
Sure.
Two,
so is Donald Trump. I'm sorry, Lisa Demuth, Kendall Qualls, Scott Jensen, none of those guys are Donald Trump. I don't see Donald Trump in front of their name, and Donald Trump is not going to be on the ballot. Your party does a very good job of trying to tie everyone and their mother to Donald Trump, but the reality is that they are not Donald Trump. He's been the nominee.
They are not Donald Trump.
He's been the nominee 3 times. They're courting his endorsement.
Let's take our turns. Preya, let's finish your thought.
$2 billion so far in fraud, and I'm sorry, but Tim Walz, Keith Ellison have had their lunch eaten day after day by the U.S. Attorney's Office on carjackings, because we all remember when the U.S. Attorney, Andrew Luger, had to step in and say the U.S. Attorney is going to start prosecuting carjackings because nobody in Minnesota on the DFL side would bother doing it. We now know that there's upwards of at least $2 billion. There's a Bloomberg article that came out this week. You know what the title is? Minnesota, the land of 10,000 frauds. That is what the United States knows Minnesota for. We have a serious problem. Meanwhile, Democrats are sitting here talking about affordability. They're talking about rent affordability and housing affordability. They're talking about groceries. They're talking about rent. They're talking about the cost of living.
And we're winning.
But the state of Minnesota under Tim Walz and the DFL, over the last 20 years, the state has gotten worse. But under Tim Walz and the DFL have squandered $2 billion, giving it to fraudsters who are buying Mercedes-Benz third and fourth homes in Kenya and Somalia and everywhere else. We have no idea if that money is going to get recouped. And you're shrugging your hands and saying, oh, well, Donald Trump is your response? I'm sorry, but that's not going to fly this year.
I got to agree with Preya. But Becky called
You
timeout.
can go ahead, Becky. Sorry.
I know Michael's itching to get something in there, and then we gotta do a round robin of final thoughts here. So Julius, I'll go to you first, so you can get all your jabs in.
I just
No. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to share one observation. Very quick story. My daughters go to have a political science class. They've had a number of speakers this year. I want to just say something. Scott Jensen showed up to their class, and Scott Jensen spoke to the class, answered the most questions, was the most engaged, and those students, now this is a public school, those students were universally blown away by, number one, his answers, his willingness to engage, and his willingness to be introspective about his last race. I'm just going to say, and people know where I've been on Jensen. We've had him on the podcast. I had my criticism. I am very impressed when my kids come home from a school and they say, we had him in, and they've had a number of elected officials and candidates in, and say the type of answer. Scott Jensen is a candidate that people should be watching, because I think he has learned a lot from his last race. And I just wanted to say, as a parent, that having a candidate come in, and a Republican candidate willing to engage students on questions, and students that disagree, I really appreciate it as a parent. And I just wanted to say, kudos to Scott Jensen for doing that.
Yeah, that's really. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, and if you want to go back and listen to our interview with him, 2-part interview after the last election, I think that showed that he learned a lot from his loss. But we're going to do, like I said, we've got a few minutes remaining. We're going to do a round robin, final thoughts on the governor's race. And if you want to continue to tie it into the results of the 2025 election, more power to you. Julius, you're up.
Well, that's really sweet, Michael. I appreciate that your kids really enjoyed that, and they got to hear a perpetual loser talk about why he's going to lose this race again. I'm really excited about that. I'm glad that he engaged. No. It's not, because you have this guy who went and said all these ridiculous things during the course of his campaign, and I'm supposed to feel like, oh my gosh, man, he really.
You said ridiculous things this episode.
Hey, I'm not.
You're going to get invited back.
I'm not running for public office, though. That's the difference, right? But here's what I'll say. Just to tie it in with the 2025 elections, what Preya has said, what Michael has said, and Becky, what you have said as well. You can name all the issues in the world that we have as a state, and guess what? Republicans still can't win. And they can't win in any other state, and they haven't won in any really good special elections for them, because you're right, Preya, Democrats are talking about affordability, and we are talking about cost of living, and we are talking about rent prices, and guess what? We are winning everywhere because of it. Donald Trump, when he ran in 2024, said he was going to deal with affordability. Guess what he hasn't done? Dealt with affordability. Guess what he's doing now? Keeping the government shut down and not paying federal workers. Listen, it all comes down to this point for me. We're cleaning Republicans' clocks across the country. We've cleaned Republicans' clocks in this state year after election. And if you're going to tell me that Republicans are going to win this year because of the fraud issue, which
didn't you just say that about Elliot Engen?
Yeah, because there's a difference in the race. There's a difference in what the office does. And Ryan Wilson almost won. It's not an unwinnable race. It's an auditor race that I think is a very different. Representative Engen. Yeah, come on, Michael, get serious. But all that to say, if you put up Tim Walz, Governor Walz, and you put up Speaker Demuth, and one of them is running under the banner of I'm Donald Trump's protege, and I'm going to bring in ICE, and I'm going to do all these things that are I'm going to bring in the National Guard to Minneapolis, which is unpopular with Americans, by the way, and is polled that way, 60%. Do it. You guys will lose again. You guys will lose again like you always have, and you can sit here and say that these issues are going to change the minds of voters, but you're not going to win suburbanites who are not interested in Donald Trump. He's your 3-time nominee, so he is the problem. And guess what? The down ballot effect of Donald Trump every midterm since he's been president and since he's been the leader of the party means we clean clock with Republicans like we will do in 2026. I cannot wait to see Lisa Demuth become the nominee so that we can have, again, a DFL speaker. Because to me, it doesn't matter what you guys do until you get your activist base under control, until you start to talk about issues that matter and separate yourself from this national Republican Party. You're not going to win here. This state has proven time and time again that even in the worst circumstances for Democrats, We still vote for Democrats. When was the last time we voted for a Republican president? What is it?
1972.
Oh, okay. That's a perfect example of just how serious voters are in the state about the things that they care about. So that's how I'll leave it there.
All right, I have so many responses, but I'm going to let Preya take a first jab because I think she's probably going to cover most of them.
Okay, so first off, right off the bat, we're going to talk about your little shutdown comment there. First of all, it's not Donald Trump keeping the government shut down. If you don't remember how this works, let me give you a quick little education on this. So it is not a simple majority of 50+1 that gets the government reopened. It's something called a filibuster, which means you need 60 senators to get it. How many Republican senators do we have again? Oh, that's right, 53, which means 7 Democrats need to cross over, do their job, and reopen the government once and for all. How many times did the Democrats vote to shut down the government? 1, 2, 3, 14. 1, 4. That is double-digit numbers that Democrats voted to shut down the government. That is number one. So we're going to just bypass that for a quick second. Second of all, we can sit here and talk about affordability and how this, we can sit here and talk about 2025, is what I meant to say, and say that this is a retrospect and a sign of things to come, looking at my crystal ball for 2026. The reality is yes, there are lessons learned from 2025 that we can apply to 2026. We can say right off the bat for the Virginia governor's race, Winsome Sears did not talk about the economy enough. She did talk about more conservative policies than she probably did the economy, and that was definitely a factor. There are a lot of bad candidates out there. We can look at California. Well, California is a blue state. Whatever happened in California was going to happen anyway. When we're looking to 2026, the reality is that there are a number of factors that are running against Governor Walz. And I will say, Julius, you're absolutely right. Republicans have not had their act together before. But if we can get our act together, if we can put good candidates in place and get on a good messaging, we can absolutely clean your clock in 2026, because there is a fraud problem. There is a lot of different issues that Democrats have failed to acknowledge and deal with over the last 20 years that is solely on the backs of the Democrats and nobody else. So yeah, if we can get our act together, because I will be the first person to acknowledge that we do have a problem. I have been on this podcast and I have said it before multiple times, but if we can get our act together, we will absolutely clean our clock, because at the end of the day, the DFL has multiple problems that they have not dealt with or have just blatantly ignored, and you cannot sit here and campaign on but Donald Trump, because it doesn't work like that, and voters in Minnesota are just not going to buy it anymore.
Listen, if all Republicans, wait, hold on. I want to compliment her really quick. If all Republicans were as pragmatic and as smart as you were, you guys would probably be winning in this state. By the way, we keep doing the Donald Trump thing and it works, but if more Republicans were like you, but that's not the case. And that's the point I'm trying to make. If people campaigned on what you're saying right now in this state, we would have competitive parties. And by the way, I'm a big proponent of that. I wish you guys were competitive. So that's the point I'm trying to make. Be more like Preya. That's literally what I'm trying to say.
I'll take it. Michael, closing thoughts on governor's race, as we're going to bring you guys back to, we obviously have more to get into on this.
I will just say that as much as I enjoy having Julius on the podcast, he needs to fine tune what I think he thinks Republicans are going to message on a little bit. I think it's going to be a little bit more sophisticated than that. I think Preya is making great points. I will say to you that I think that 2026 represents the best opportunity for Republicans to win a statewide race that has happened since 2002. They won in 2006 when I worked at the state party. Republicans haven't won in 20 years. This is the best opportunity to win statewide. And I think with the right type of messaging and the right type of candidate, Republicans can succeed in one of those statewide offices. But we'll be talking much more about it on future episodes.
Yes, and I want to, before I get into my final thoughts, I just want to thank you guys for bringing the heat and really having this great conversation. My final thoughts on this is I do agree, yes, Julius, that we need pragmatic Republicans. I do think with some of the candidates we do have in the governor's race, we do have that. I do think we're going to see an elevated level of messaging that we haven't seen, and a more cohesive messaging. We're going to see just a lot more to it. And I think that what we're going to see and what we saw in 2025 is some of these candidates that really tied the local economic realities to actionable policies. And when you do that, I think that we can see successes like some of the Democrats did locally. And I think that I'm going to, if you haven't gathered, my two favorites are Speaker Demuth and Representative Robbins, because I think that with their record and with their voice against fraud, against the work of the speaker and negotiating some of the things that she has done, that they can do that. They can put the action behind the policy and not just be against Democrats, but be against for some of the proposed policies that the Republicans at the legislature have been arguing and fighting for. I think fraud is going to be huge. As much as you want to dismiss that, Julius, I think it is something that it is actual Minnesota taxpayer dollars that are being lost. I think that we have not seen, while yes, we saw support for Governor Walz in the past, we have not seen this level of wild amount of fraud coming under his administration in his own office while he has been on the ballot. And so, like you like to give a little bit of dings to Donald Trump and his waning support as he continues to run, so is the case for Governor Walz as he enters his third term and the unfavorability of folks not wanting him to run through a third term. We know that being against Donald Trump cannot be enough. And if that's something that Democrats are going to do, is just try to tie these Republicans to Donald Trump and how Donald Trump is bad, I don't think that's a winning recipe. And so one other thing I think we expect to see is kind of, again, the radical Democrats tie in their running of the cities and not being successful. And why do we want that on a statewide level again? So there is a lot that's going to come. We have a whole year to get into this. So I expect you guys to continue to find your very meek, timid opinions that you have on the matter, and come back for further conversations, because we are going to get polling. We are going to see messages emerge, and we're going to have so much more to talk to as we are just 3 months, 4 months out from caucus right now. And it's wild. I just got goosebumps because while it's far, it's so soon. So thank you guys so much. Michael, I'll let you wrap us up here.
Well, no, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming on. This was a great episode, and we can't wait to have you guys on again. Okay?
Thank you.
Always happy to come back.
Yeah, I'm never coming back. This was awful. That's the worst experience. I'm getting attacked by 3 Republicans. It's just hack city over here.
Hey, thank you for calling me a
Hack
Republican.
City. I'll
That
take
means, means a lot to me.
Royce White Republican.
Thank you.
Okay.
Becky, we just finished an interview with a very soft interview with Preya and Julius. Your take on the discussion?
Oh, I love it. It reminds me why I love doing this podcast. I have really, really enjoyed the interviews we've done over the last couple of months and the conversations we've had and the topics we've covered. But I am feeling, this week was election week. It was exciting. There was a lot going on. And it was just really reinvigorating to have a good debate. We know these two individuals like to poke each other's buttons and, can really go at it, but are at the end of the day are smiling and happy, and everybody understands we're playing roles here and doing our thing. It was awesome. I truly can't wait to do more and more and more of these in the next year. We are a year out from the 2026 election, and so many conversations have, like I said, to become. We know we're going to see more polling, and I'm super excited to see as these candidates advance and where they're getting their support from, but especially the messaging angle of things and what messaging is moving voters. We're going to really see that solidified as they do their own internals, and as we see some groups do externals as well. So I loved it. It was really fun. It's going to be a wild year. I can't believe we're back for another year of elections.
It's amazing to think, and I think that both Preya and Julius, I think, encapsulated the energy that we're going to start seeing. As that conversation started going, it was a realization, the 2026 election has started, and we're going to be here having conversations and discussions, and I hope we get some candidates on, but certainly I agree with you. We took a break last week, and we'll discuss those reasons later in this episode, but that was a great way to kick off kind of the election of 2026 with those two guests. And our listeners are going to hear both see and hear that energy of that debate.
And I think that it just, like you says, encapsulates what we're going to feel, that we've got Democrats that are fed up with Donald Trump and, wanting to make sure that those midterms reflect that frustration. We have Republicans who really see an opportunity, and especially here in Minnesota, want to defeat, while Trump did not win Minnesota, or some Republicans feel emboldened that they defeated Governor Walz at the polls, that he was not successful as the VP candidate. They want to see him go down. We know that he has lost some support among some of those independents. It's really, like you said, the best opportunity Republicans have had in 2 decades here, and it's going to be really interesting to see if they can take it and run with it. More to come on that, but we're going to turn over to, I think, probably one of the topics that you've been most excited about in a really long time. Would you like to kick it off?
Yes. As folks know, those that follow me on social media know that I'm a bit of a junk food person, and I'm a big donut person. And Krispy Kreme is coming back, and it's coming back to your neighborhood.
To my neighborhood.
Next week, Krispy Kreme opens November 12th, Wednesday, November 12th. Just a little bit of my personal history. When Krispy Kreme opened in, I believe, 2002 in Maple Grove, I think it opened at 5 or 6 in the morning. All I know is I was there around 3 or 4 in the morning waiting, and there was a line there. And so Wednesday, November 12th, in the early hours, I might be camping out in your driveway.
All right.
with a collage of people, but I'm very excited about Krispy Kreme, its new location, and I'm going to be there in line. And I'm hoping, maybe because of the proximity, you could maybe talk to some of the management and leadership. They would be a great sponsor of our podcast. I would go all in on Krispy Kremes.
Oh, I am with you. We'll see what we can do. Like you mentioned, they're just a handful of miles from my home, the new location up in Fridley. We are very excited for it as well. A couple fun facts, because of course I did my show prep on Krispy Kreme. First of all, I also remember the opening of the Maple Grove one, and I will say it was because I was in high school and at a track meet that was in Maple Grove, and so there was a lot of traffic in the area because of that. And one of the fun facts is, in the first week of sales at that Maple Grove location, they sold $480,000
I was a
worth
good
of
percentage
Krispy
of
Kremes
those.
in 1 week in Maple Grove. All you. It should also be noted, throughout the grand opening week, this Fridley Krispy Kreme is going to have 120 guests that will be randomly awarded a celebration ticket. That's going to allow them a dozen free glazed donuts every month for a year. So that's very exciting. I hope that you are one of the many. And then 2 other fun facts real quick. This is going to actually be like a little regional hub. They're going to be producing Krispy Kremes to give to different suppliers, distributors, grocery stores, convenience stores, and the like. But one thing I was bummed to see as I was researching about Krispy Kreme is they originally had a deal. They were going to sell donuts at McDonald's nationwide by the end of 2026. That deal has since dissolved and is not going to be the case. Kind of a bummer, because I like me some McDonald's too.
That's good. I was going to ask, because I remember your terrible food takes. You're not a sweet person. You're a savory in
So I
breakfast.
do tend, like when I want a snack, I do tend to want salty snacks. However, since my first pregnancy, my sweet tooth, during that, I would very often tell my husband that the baby wants donuts, because I don't think I've eaten as many donuts as I did during my 2 pregnancies as I had in the rest of my life. And since then, since this last one, it's still carried over. I had donuts this weekend. They were delicious. So I am a donut gal.
Well, I appreciate the proximity to your home. The donuts will be, and I really appreciate your family accommodating me and a collection of people who are going to
We
be
got a large
probably
driveway for you.
camping out in your driveway
Perfect.
and going to get donuts. But I'm very excited for Krispy Kreme. And if Krispy Kreme, as I know you'll be listening to this episode, we are open to a partnership and sponsorship of this podcast. We are a Krispy Kreme family. So thank you. And we look forward to partaking in some sugar next week.
Another topic of big note for a great week that you have is you kicked some butt this week in our fantasy league.
Yes, and for our listeners who don't know, Becky was boycotting last week because I had picked up some points last week too. So that's why we didn't have a show last week. She was on strike because she refused to do a podcast episode where I was continuing to dominate in fantasy football. Both for my family that's listening, I'm crushing in that league, just crushing. And again, I had a great week last week. And by the way, as you noted, I'm now ahead of you by how many games?
2.
And shame on you.
I
You
know. I
didn't
was
pick
hoping
the
I was going to get
Vikings.
away with it.
You didn't pick the Vikings to beat Detroit.
They were going against the Lions. Come on, I really want to win.
Yes. And boy, just shame on you.
I
There was only
know.
one other person in the league. I won't name them because of data privacy laws. But one other person did select the Vikings, and I'm proud to stand in solidarity with that. And once again, just shame on you. I expect better.
Yep.
But I am now. We still got to go after Golnick, who's. Am I 2 behind him?
You're 2 behind him. So you're in solo second place.
I like that.
Our first place has 96. You are in second with 94, and I am tied for third with 92.
Who else is at 92?
Mike Zipko, my colleague. So I've got some work to do here.
You do. Hopefully, you'll start making some better picks.
I'll do what
Becky,
I can.
I want to thank you for doing this episode. And I also want to just say, as we close, we mentioned it in our intro, this is the start of our 4th season. And I just want to say how much I've enjoyed hosting this podcast with you. You are so essential to this show with scripts, hosting, and doing a lot of the questions that go on. You provide such balance. You provide such a calm voice. You organize these shows when we have chaos going on all the time. And I just can't compliment you enough. I respect the discussions we've had, the honest discussions, the unfiltered discussions, your intellect, your sense of humor, and just your dedication to the show. I couldn't imagine doing it with anyone else. I want to thank you and your family for always making time for the show. And I'm looking forward to our 4th season. But I just want to say how much I appreciate doing this podcast with you. I really enjoy it. And thanks to the sacrifice you make, your family makes, in making sure we have an opportunity to do this.
And right back at you. I cannot believe we've done, some 150 episodes going into our 4th season. It's been awesome and so much fun, and truly would not be possible without you running the technical side and fixing audio and getting it uploaded everywhere and shared. So thank you for doing that and being the AV nerd that you were and are. But it's been so much fun, and I'm excited for heading into another election year.
Our rule has always been that this podcast is supposed to be fun. And I was really excited about today's episode. I missed it last week. And as long as that keeps happening, we're going to keep cranking out episodes.
You bet.
But boy, this was a fun episode. And thank you again. We also want to thank all of our listeners for listening to this episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at BB BreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be back next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye-bye.